Welcome back to NewZeroland. So now that my big road trip series is over, I have unfinished business to take care of. So in this video, we're putting the Energica on a dyno. So you know how on gas bikes, when you look at the specs, it'll say it makes 100 horsepower at 14,000 RPM or something, and it makes such and such torque at this RPM. Well, we all know electric motors give you all that torque almost immediately, but peak horsepower still happens somewhere later on that power curve. So I want to find out where. And since these are basically direct drive, your RPMs are directly related to your speed. So 0 to 10,500 RPM, which is the red line, could be the same as 0 to 240 k's an hour, or whatever the top speed is. So your peak horsepower is at a certain RPM, which is also at a certain speed. And so I want to find out what that speed is, and if I'm ever actually experiencing peak horsepower on the street. And the best way to do this is to get the bike on a dyno. The only motorcycle shop in my area that has a dyno is Boyle Brothers. This was the first electric motorcycle they've had on the dyno, and so they were just as excited as I was. To get it to work on the dyno though, they had to turn off the traction control because the front wheel wasn't spinning, so it was limiting the bike to 15 k's an hour. Maybe the 15 k's an hour is so that you can still do victory burnouts. But yeah, once that was off, they did 4 runs, and the 4th run was the best. How cool did that sound? So yeah, they said after a few runs, the power kept going up, and so they figured that the motor and gearbox fluid had to heat up to an optimal temperature to get full power. But let's check out the graph. This is super cool to see because you get a glimpse into the mind of the programmers, or motor tuners, or whatever you want to call them. It doesn't make peak horsepower until over 100 k's an hour, so I was right that I'm never seeing full power on the street. Except when the kittens come out, and this ease in, ramp up that they programmed in also explains why the Zero can keep up acceleration wise. Until this point, and that's where the magic happens. This section of power between 100 and 200 k's an hour is almost totally flat. Full power, exactly where you need it on the racetrack. What we're looking at is electric race bike perfection right here. At the end of the graph is the top speed, and on the dash the bike went all the way up to 250, but the dyno stopped spinning at 225. So I'm going to say that's probably the real world top speed of this bike. So peak horsepower was 132. And I know 132 horsepower doesn't sound like a lot, but the guys at the shop explained that the motor is probably making the full 143 horsepower like Energica says, but there's always going to be some driveline loss, like from the reduction gear down to the chain, to the wheel, to the rollers on the dyno. So losing about 10 horsepower is normal. But it's never as simple as that, right? With electrics, the lower your battery gets, the lower the voltage is, and so the less power you have. When it did the dyno runs, it was around 95%, so it's making full power. But what happens when it gets below 90%? Or below 50%? You know, at what point does the software start limiting the power to protect the battery? Well, hiring the dyno all day was out of the question, so I found a place where I could ride at least 100 k's an hour to do a full power test at different battery percentages. I'm not even going to say I rode to Mexico because no one would believe me. So let's just say I was on a closed course and had permission to do this. Okay, I started at 95% because fast charging stations only go up to 95% here. But I figure that's close enough to 100%, so it should be the same power. As we saw on the dyno sheet, I'm not going to get full power unless we're in kitten mode, so... On hard acceleration, for a moment it got up to 203 Newton meters of torque, and at whatever kitten speed I was going, right before I let off, the dash showed 109 kilowatts, which both of those figures are higher than what Energica claims, so that's cool. Then I rode around to drain the battery and did another run at 90%. On this run, it only showed 94 kilowatts. Quite a big drop already, but I'm not sure if it was just that run, so I'll do another one at 85. So at 85%, it only read 92 kilowatts, which means maybe the power is dropping already. At 80%, it was the same 92 kilowatts. At 75%, it was back up to 94 kilowatts, same power it was putting out at 90%. But when it got down to 70%, the most I saw was 86 kilowatts, so that's quite a big drop. At 65%, I got another 86 kilowatts, so I have to confirm we're seeing the power starting to ramp down. At 60%, 85 kilowatts. At 55%, 80 kilowatts was the most it would do. I have a feeling it's only going to get lower from here, but let's see what happens. At 50% state of charge, 78 kilowatts. At 45%, 76 kilowatts. And I'm actually starting to see the power dropping as soon as I get around 95 k's an hour. At 40%, 74 kilowatts. Even though the power is dropping, it's still making 100 horsepower. At 35%, it did another leap down to 67 kilowatts. 30% was able to pull 68 kilowatts, which is more than last time, so things are getting interesting here. I have a feeling there are a lot of factors involved, like the heat of the battery, the road conditions, the temperature outside, but we're definitely seeing a drop in power, which, as the battery voltage gets lower, it's pretty normal. At 25%, it only dropped down a bit to 66 kilowatts. At 20%, the highest reading was 63 kilowatts. Now we're into that scary red battery bar. And at 15%, it did another big drop, just touching 54 kilowatts for a moment and holding 53 kilowatts until I let off. Even with the battery this low though, it still makes more power than my Zero. 10% was my last run because I wanted to make sure I would get back to the charging station. And on that run, it wouldn't budge over 40 kilowatts. It might be hard to understand what's going on with all this messy editing and kittens, so I learned how to use Google Sheets and made another graph, because graphs are awesome. On the left side we have power in kilowatts, and on the bottom we have the battery percentage. And you can see as the power goes down, it doesn't have a set point like 60% where the power just dramatically drops. It does this kind of stair-steppy thing. Below 90% it drops a lot, which I didn't expect, because that means if a fast charging station only goes up to 95%, I only have 5% to use full power, which is like 5 kilometers. So that's kind of a bummer. But then it holds pretty much the same power until 75%, where it steps down again. I have a feeling these stair steps were programmed in to hold as much power as they can, to keep it from feeling like it's always dropping down. This is another graph that I think is super interesting. Obviously this is just my experience on my bike, which isn't the newest Energica available, so I'm curious how the power mapping is on the newer Energicas with the bigger batteries. So if anybody watching has an Ego Plus or an Evo Rebelle or one of those new crazy RS models with ridiculous power, and you have like 5 hours to do a test like this, definitely let me know how it goes. I'd love to see the power difference and how the battery management has improved in newer models. I mean, all this is really interesting to me, and seeing the dyno graph, like seeing how flat that power curve is, just blows my mind. It's like, it's so cool to see. And I think what surprised me the most is that after doing like 18 full throttle runs to kitten speed, I still got over 100 k's of range. This bike is amazing. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.